Welcome to the Austin Method, where we help you develop the skills of square dancing. Square dancing as a topic is big. This program is divided into the individual videos covering the calls, and then there are the general information videos. This video is part of the general information videos. You can think of them as reference material. Don't think of them as prerequisites. Some of them are longer and you're wanting to dance, so you may not want to watch from beginning to end. If you've got time, it's well worth the watch, but if you're in a hurry, go ahead and move on to learning the calls. There are two videos I would think of as prerequisites. That's the learning and practice video. That gives you tips and tricks and helps you organize your learning. It'll give you the most efficient way to maximize your learning of the skills of square dancing. The second one, it's the site walkthrough, and it'll show you how to navigate this website, how to find the pieces and parts you may be looking for. Those two are prerequisites. Otherwise, if you want to move on to the skills of square dancing, go ahead. But if you got the time, this is some great material. If you don't, make sure you come back as you get further into it. Come back to these materials and go over them. Even if you go through them at the beginning, come back to them, because as you gain vocabulary, you will get more from it in a second viewing as you get further along. So without any further ado, let's get to the video. All right, learning and practice. We're going to talk about methods for learning and practicing. So here we go. Square dancing is a skill. It's very much a skill. It has to be a skill. It isn't a hobby. It isn't something that you can sort of do. To do it successfully, it has to become a skill, and we'll talk about what it means to be a skill in a minute here. But it has to become like riding a bike or throwing a ball or drawing. It has to become something that your mind doesn't actively say, pick up the ball, cock your arm back, release the ball. It has to be, you've learned the motions, you've learned the definitions, and it just happens. Like riding a bike, and that's why we call it, we say things are like riding a bike, because it moves to a special location in your brain that is the location reserved for skills. And square dancing has to be moved to that portion of your brain. It comes too fast, too furious, and it would be too hard to be trying to do it by knowledge alone. Recalling the definition of things as you go, because you've only got a second to do some of these. They're 2 beats, that's 1 second, that's it. So, using the Austin method, or TAM, you should do it the right way. The issue is there's no right way. Any way you want to use this material is the right way. We have some recommendations, we have some ideas about how we thought it would be used, but any way that helps you is the right way. A very good way of using it is in parallel to traditional group lessons. If you happen to be attending traditional group square dance lessons, using this material in parallel will put you at the top of your class. It's the material you need to do the homework, to do the exercises. And we'll get into why some of that is really useful in just a minute, but that is an excellent way to do it. That doesn't mean you need to be in group lessons. You can always do this ahead of group lessons. You can always do it as a follow-up to group lessons. You can do it in areas where there are no group lessons available. We created this so that it would be complete. How long will it take? Everybody wants to know how long it's going to take. Well, that just depends on you. It is a DIY program. Do it yourself. DIY. It's a DIY program. So how long it takes is totally up to you. But the nice thing is you have access to the materials. Remember, you can always rewind and go over things multiple times until you're comfortable with it. So, plan your learning. If you want to maximize your efficiency, if you want to learn fast, so everybody wants to know how long it'll take, well, plan your learning, it'll take less. So we're going to give you a sample plan, and this is it. So let's say you want to start learning this weekend, so you start learning the one couple stuff Saturday morning. You review what you learned in the morning and finish learning the one couple stuff in the evening. You review the one couple stuff Sunday morning, you review it again Sunday night, then you can skip Monday and go to Tuesday and review it again. Go to Friday, so you're skipping a couple more days and reviewing it. And then Saturday you start learning the two couple stuff. Saturday night you finish learning the two couple stuff. Sunday you're reviewing the one couple and the two couple stuff. By Sunday night, you're just reviewing the two couple. Tuesday night, you're still reviewing the two couple. And then all the way to the next Friday, you're reviewing the one couple and you're reviewing the two couple. So this is an example of spaced repetition. And we'll get into that in a little bit. All right, so what are the elements of a good plan? Well, the first element is to have a learning plan. I know it seems redundant, and it is, but it's important. All right, so the key elements of a learning plan. You need to know the components of what you're learning. You need to know what it is you're trying to learn. If you're trying to learn a high jump, you have to learn the approach, you have to learn the jump, you have to learn the landing. If you're learning square dancing, there are certain things you got to learn. You have to learn about formations and identifiers and then the calls. And to do that, you need materials. So to effectively plan your learning, you need to know what materials are available. In this case, we have provided all the materials you'll need in terms of text, videos, animation, everything you'll need, but you should be familiar with what those materials are and how to use them. So we have general info videos, which are think of it as, I guess, the overhead of square dancing. It's not the actual square dancing, but it's the stuff about square dancing, safety, formations, identifiers, handholds, frames, that kind of thing. And then we have the instructional videos, which are basically all the calls that you'll be learning, and then the review videos as well, which are the primary focus of you doing the skills. They are the exercises, the thing that when you've accomplished it, you'll know that you've arrived. Scheduling. Scheduling is very important and a key element of your learning plan because of learning and memory. Now we're going to get specifically into learning and memory in a couple minutes, but the way we learn and how our memory works, if you don't schedule your learning and your reviews properly, particularly the most efficient way is with spaced repetition. But if you don't schedule them properly, you end up having to relearn stuff because you've let it escape your memory. And then a key element of your learning plan is that you have to actually do it and understand that you're going to hit bumps in the road and you got to stay flexible. Be able to adjust your learning plan as you go, not beat yourself up, and get back to it. So let's talk about the materials, the general information videos. So the first one we have is about learning and practice. You're watching that right now. Second is about rules and safety. We always have to cover rules and safety, particularly rules. There's not a lot to the safety in square dancing. It's a pretty safe activity, but it's good to know the rules because there are definitely some things you should know to keep from embarrassing yourself or others. Then we have a video on general tips, formations, identifiers, and more tips. Also not listed here is we have a video on handholds and frames. Instructional videos. This is the key reference material. This is where you learn the vocabulary of the skills and the definitions of those skills. We call them calls, and this is where you learn what the definition of those calls are, tips and tricks about the calls. So that is your key reference material. So the early ones are really basic and a little bit boring. Because these videos are progressive, the very first video, and I'm going to talk about the very first video in a second here, but the very first video you have access to one call, the call you're learning, which is face. Not a lot you can do with one call. So it's very repetitious, not complicated. We start with some of the easy ones, so move through it fairly quickly. As I mentioned, they are progressive. You must do them in order because when you get to the second one, it assumes you already know face. And when you get to the third, it assumes you know face and you turn back. And when you get to the fourth one, it assumes you know the first three. If you don't take them progressively, you may not be able to do the exercises or the parts. That doesn't mean you can't use these materials. Remember, there's no wrong way to use the materials, but you can use the materials to just jump to a particular call that you might be having trouble with in group lessons, just knowing that you may not know all the things required to do the exercises to that point, but it can still be very informative. So the review videos. This is the goal. This is where it all comes together. This is where we combine all the calls you know. We put them in different orders, different sequences. We try and let you see how it happens from one side and the other. These are the things that when you get through them, you'll know that you've acquired that skill set. So repeat them until they're smooth and comfortable. And even then, go back and maybe look at some of the general information videos and see if you can't improve them. For instance, go back and look at the handholds and frames and see if you can't improve how you're doing your handholds and if you can't use your frames to lead and follow a little bit more effectively. Full speed ahead. These videos are all done at 126 beats per minute, which is a typical square dance. There are some callers that call a little faster, some call a little slower, but they could have been done at a walk-through pace. They could have been done slowly to make you feel like you've gotten through them easier and give you time to think about the calls and do the next one. But that's not how we convince our minds to develop a skill. To develop a skill, you have to do things at speed. If you have time to think about picking up the ball, cocking your arm, throwing the ball, releasing the ball, by that time the guy's on second base and it's too late. So you have to have a skill of picking up, throwing the ball, and not thinking about it the whole process. So square dancing is the same way. You need to do these things at speed in order to turn them into skills. We promised we'd talk about learning and memory, and it's extremely important, and it will help enhance your experience greatly. So here we go. Meta learning. So we are learning about learning because we think the more you know about how the brain learns, how it remembers, how it works, how it turns knowledge into a skill, we think that you'll be better prepared to face what is necessary to do that. The brain is extremely efficient. It likes to forget. If it remembered everything you ever saw or heard or did or thought about, it'd fill up pretty quick. Even though we got billions of brain cells, it still likes to be efficient and snip and cut and eliminate things that it doesn't think you need. Well, in square dancing, we don't want it to forget anything because we need this stuff, and we have 7 other people relying on us to remember it. So what are the types of memory? Well, you have short-term memory, and that's the memory that everything goes into. Everything that happened in the last hour, everything that happened in the last day, and typically the last 3 or 4 days was at one point put in short-term memory. Some of it, if your brain knows it's not going to need it, it dumps it out earlier. But if it's trying to hold on to it in short-term memory, typically 4 days is about the max it can hold on to stuff in short-term memory. So if you really want to remember something, it moves that stuff to long-term. So if you're paying enough attention to it, if you're thinking about it enough, it'll take your short-term memory and move it to long-term. And that's how we typically learn in group lessons. We learn everything very short-term memory. We have a lot of repetition, and some of it gets moved to long-term memory. Some of those things we think about over the next couple days, and they get to switch to long-term memory. And then we get to group lessons the next week, and we find out some of it escaped any memory at all, because actual short-term memory has a shelf life of about 4 days. So if it didn't get moved to long-term, by the next week it's gone and you have to relearn it. Muscle memory. This is what we talk about when we're talking about throwing a ball or riding a bike or a skill. Sometimes it's called muscle memory. And that is the memory that's reserved for things we think we really, really need, our brain thinks we need, in the very quick access segment of our memory, which is like throwing a ball, or, maybe throwing a spear. You're being attacked by a lion. You want a skill of throwing a spear. You don't want knowledge of how to throw a spear. Same thing here. In square dancing, you have 2 beats, which is 1 second to perform some of the calls and move on to the next one. So you don't have time to stop and think. You want square dancing to be a skill and to be, as much as possible, moved to muscle memory. Just-in-time reinforcement. Just-in-time is a manufacturing term, by the way. But just-in-time reinforcement is where you recognize the shelf life, and you recognize that a memory is going to disappear in a certain amount of time, and you reinforce it just before it disappears. That's the most efficient, because if you reinforce it before that period, you're just doing extra practice. If you try to do your reinforcement after it's already gone, well, you're too late. So the most efficient way to do it is to do it just in time. That's called spaced repetition in the learning world. So building skills. So the path of memory is basically as it's laid out there. It's initially in short term, then it moves to long term, then it moves to muscle memory, and that's the path that a skill takes through your memory and becomes a skill. So short term is 4 days max, as I mentioned. Long term, it can be years, but it's really slow retrieval. So when you have 2 beats to recall and do and move on to the next thing, you don't want to be accessing it from long-term memory. And then a skill or muscle memory is like riding a bike or playing the piano. It's just there in that section of memory that is reserved as a skill. Repetition at speed. I've mentioned this before, but to convince your brain that it doesn't have time to go to long-term memory and free up some of that very protected skill memory, you have to ask for those recollections from memory at speed. In other words, if the brain thinks, I have plenty of time to get that, I'm not moving that to a skill, I'm going to continue to get it from my memory of knowledge, long-term memory. So it has to be done over and over again at speed. The dumb phase. So there comes a point in square dancing where you're learning and you're doing really good, but the caller's giving it to you kind of slow, and you're able to recall the definition and do stuff slowly. But then the caller turns up the speed, and I'm talking about group lessons here. The caller turns up the speed and your brain starts moving stuff to muscle memory. It says, oh, I need that quickly. I'm going to move that from long-term memory to muscle memory. And all of a sudden, and I want to mention this because it can really freak people out, all of a sudden you forget everything. You can't get it from long-term memory, you can't get it from skills memory, and it's a weird place where your brain is in the process of moving it from one to the other and can't decide where to get it from, and therefore you don't think it can find it. But the truth is, if you keep going through those speed exercises and moving forward, pretty soon you'll find it as a skill. But we've experienced this several times where we're thinking we're doing really well, we're starting to speed up and it's going well, and then all of a sudden we can't remember it slow, fast, or anyway. So just be aware of that. Don't get discouraged. It's not gone. It's just confused for a very short period. Making it happen. Basically, you just got to do it. You got to do the repetition at speed. You have to do it over and over again. So how do we make it happen? Whenever we're learning something, there are three things that come into play. The frequency that we present the material to our brain, the breadth of the material, or our studying of the material, and the depth of, of our study of the material. Frequency is how often we look at the material, how often we review the material. The breadth is how widely we study the material. Do we study all aspects, the history? Do we study all the pieces and parts? Or are we studying how to swing a racket and a backhand? Period. We're not studying everything about tennis. We're just studying a very focused piece. And then the depth is how deeply we go into it. Do we go into the mechanics? Do we go into the nutritional needs of the cells and that kind of thing? So when we're learning the skill of square dancing, we really want to focus on the frequency, doing it often, and the breadth. We should know all the pieces and parts that go into what we're trying to do, but not necessarily go into the depth. So for frequency, spaced repetition is the way to go. We've talked about that, which is initially you review something more frequently and you space out on a greater scale how often you go over the material. That deals with the frequency. Variety. So this relates to breadth. So the brain likes variety. If you give it one thing and say, you will learn this, you will learn this, you will learn this, it may rebel, it may learn it, it may not. But if you give the brain 5 things to study, it'll pick out 3 that it likes, learn those 3, and then you come back and include those other 2 in another list of 5, and it'll pick them up. But the brain likes variety. So make sure you keep moving forward, make sure that you don't get too stuck on any one thing. Scheduling, spaced repetition. We've mentioned it over and over and over again because it is really the way to learn a skill in the most efficient way. Basically, Here's an example of doing spaced repetition. So you spend 20 minutes learning something, then you take a 6-hour break. You spend 15 minutes relearning it and or reviewing it. Then you take a 12-hour break. Then you do a 10-minute review. You do a 1-day break. And these aren't fixed in stone, but this is an example of scheduling. You do another 10-minute review. You do a 2-day break. Then you do a 5-minute review with a 4-day break, and you can see how it's spaced out. So the 3-day rule is never let more than 3 days go by on anything that's only in short-term memory. So the first time you learn something, don't let more than 3 days go by. Second time you learn something, maybe you can go a little shorter, but if you really want to learn something, review it within 3 days of the first time you see it. That can be spaced out as you go along, but initially there's a 3-day rule. So if we go back and review our sample plan from the beginning, you can actually see the spaced repetition in it. We do Saturday morning, we do some learning. Saturday evening, we do some review and finish learning. Sunday morning, if there's anything else to learn. Sunday morning, we do some review. Sunday evening, we do some review. And then we can skip a day. And we move on to Tuesday evening. Then we can skip a couple days and we move on to Friday evening. And then Saturday morning, for variety, remember our brain likes variety. Now there was already variety in the one couple stuff, but to give it more variety, we start learning the two couple stuff. Saturday evening, we review and finish the two couple stuff. Sunday morning, we review both the one couple and the two couple. Sunday evening, we review the two couple. Tuesday evening, we review the two couple. And then Friday, we're back to reviewing both. And this, you can see how you just continue this, spacing it out over time until it's a hard and fast skill like riding a bike. I've gone 10, 15 years. I square danced when I was in high school. And I've gone 10, 12 years and jumped right into a square dance, honestly. Now, it wasn't a difficult square dance, but you can jump right back in. It is like riding a bike once you turn it into a skill. Blast it. Okay, so we asked at the beginning, how long will it take? This is the fastest way to learn square dancing. They're called blast classes, and they take 1 weekend. And people have been learning this way, learning to square dance this way for actually a long time. And it can be done, and it works. But as we've seen with spaced repetition and short-term memory, the people that learn in blast classes typically don't know anything a week later. And by don't know anything, obviously I'm exaggerating, but they can't square dance a week later because they've forgotten too much and they have to do it again. But blast classes work really, really well if you have access to materials and if you do the review that you need to do. And that is the secret to making blast classes work. So if you truly want to learn square dancing in 1 weekend, it can be done. But you have to arrange for and schedule for reviewing over the coming 3-4 weeks. If you don't schedule that review, if you don't do that review, you're wasting your time and energy. So here's a typical blast class schedule, which is you take a class in the morning for 3 hours, you take a class in the afternoon for an hour and a half. Sunday morning you do another heavy review and maybe some relearning for 3 hours, and then Sunday evening you do a quick dance / review, and then over the coming week you have some quick practices. and space it out. So you use your knowledge of spaced repetition to save your blast class. I'm not necessarily recommending a blast class. I'm saying it is the fastest way. Sometimes people need to learn square dancing really quick. For instance, their friends and them have signed up for a square dancing cruise. I've seen people do that and needed a blast class so that they're ready for that square dancing cruise with their friends. Execute the plan. Just do it. Plan's no good if you don't do it. And if you don't do the whole thing, if you don't do the spaced repetition, if you leave out pieces and parts, it doesn't work. If you do happen to miss a session or, you adjust, but get back in and do it. And that's it. Yay. Thank you for visiting the Austin Method. We hope to see you on the dance